Last week we did our subathon where you guys managed to raise enough and unlock the challenge to play Final Fantasy XIV. So I want to clear up a few things here. Why didn't we play Final Fantasy XIV immediately after finishing World of Warcraft? I wasn't ready for another MMO yet. I've been playing World of Warcraft pretty hardcore for a long time, and jumping straight into a new MMO was not something I was ready for. As much as I did want to try it, I needed the break. We've had that break. It's now time to jump in. I'm more than excited for it. Are we going in completely blind? Obviously not, right? We have seen several videos I've made where I was looking at very end game bosses and working out what the boss mechanics were. And you guys love those videos. But I still had no idea what the classes were doing. I'm figuring out what the boss does rather than how the game plays. I actually have no idea how this game plays. I've been given several warnings. It's going to be super slow. You're not going to enjoy it. There's lots of anime stuff in there. All these kind of things. But this is the plan. I'm going to go in from the start. A Realm Reborn. The first game. Technically not the first game, but you guys understand what I'm saying. I'll explain that in the video. And go from the start, exploring this main story quest, seeing what the world is like, and seeing it from a new player's perspective, relatively blind. I will take some advice on this one. I'm not going to treat it as hardcore as I did with Path of Exile, but for the most part, I want to figure things out for myself, and I'll keep you updated as our journey goes through. So today's video is going to be looking at day one. This is going to be 8 hours played. That's what I've just done, is the first 8 hours. I'm telling you my thoughts so far, and also we'll track how this opinion changes over the course of the game. So let's jump into it. Let's get straight into it then. So I need to set the scene for some of you who've never played Final Fantasy, just so we know where we're at. Final Fantasy XIV, when it launched, was not good. People really disliked it, and including the developers, they really disliked it. So they had an event called the Cataclysm, or the Destruction of the World. Basically, they erased the entire game. That's an important thing, because the new game, which is A Realm Reborn, takes part after that. And if you haven't seen the trailer, which thankfully I now have seen the trailer, there's not much context for what's actually happened, because they refer back to this event where the entire world was destroyed and then remade, A Realm Reborn, and the game starts from there, talking about this event in the past. And you can look up to the sky and see this enormous red meatball, and you're kind of like, what the hell is that? Is that going to be something that takes place later? No, that's something that happened in the past. And there's also a lot of flashbacks and cutscenes while you're playing, referring back to this event. So, more importantly, if you're ever going to jump into Final Fantasy, watch the Realm Reborn trailer, because it makes a ton more sense what's going on in this game. That you're not doing the game as it was intended. It's not like vanilla World of Warcraft where you're starting off there. Think of it as if the game started after World of Warcraft's Cataclysm and just plunged you into it and kept referring to some sort of dragon that had wiped out the world, and you're like, what happened? Something like that. That would be the interesting thing. So that's where the game starts and takes place. First of all, character creation. The character creation is okay. It's passable. It's old. It's, you know, it's what it is for an MMO. There's new and better options out there today, but it's serviceable. It's fine. My character ended up looking a bit like Michael Cera. Wasn't what I was intending, but that's the way it went out. It's fine. Most people know the characters for the races in there, the Lalafels and the dragons and all that kind of thing, but it's more than fine. It's more about the Transmog and stuff that comes later in the game. But the character creation was certainly, I would say it's better than World of Warcraft's, but it's not like outstandingly better. It's more than enough to get a decent character made for your MMO, and as your character pops up in cutscenes a huge amount, it's sometimes takes you out of it a little bit because your character's not voice acted, at least not now. And remember, I'm talking this from a newbie perspective, and your character just nods mostly and has this very dry, emotionless face, which I was actually begging for my character to show some kind of emotion. At best, you'll get sort of a wry smile, but most of the time your character just kind of goes, and just kind of nods. It's a little weird because the other characters in the game, despite the game being old but being remade, have definite improvements on your character. So, at least for me, my character stands out quite a bit, but the character creation was more than fine. Let's talk about the questing in the game then. So this is where it really starts to pick up, and what Final Fantasy XIV has been lambasted as being superior in many ways. Similar to the way Star Wars The Old Republic is, Star Wars The Old Republic, is that it's so much better than World of Warcraft's. So, this is true, 100%. This is very easy to see. The main story scenario that you play through, or the main scenario questing, is considerably superior. Your character feels like it's taking part in something eventful. You are, of course, the champion. Something of a meme in MMOs from all sides, but it is done in a way that kind of makes some sense. And the stories are also self-contained within little stories that are happening in the area. I can say, without doubt, at all. I fully understand what's going on in the zone I'm in. That makes total sense to me, and I was meeting important characters, I was dealing with events that were interesting, there were betrayals, there were backstabs, there were all these kinds of things, and then the wonderful use of scenarios, which I wish World of Warcraft would have used, in terms of giving you big story elements, plays out wonderfully. It gives you a nice warning. It's like, hey, you're going into a scenario at this point where there's going to be an event, a more set-piece event. That is fantastic. That is so much better because you get the sense of an actual thing happening to you. And because it's set in these scenarios, they then are able to throw in more big story mysteries and cutscenes because you're in this self-contained environment, which you can't do in a fully procedurally open world area where your character would just AFK. So if you think about it in World of Warcraft, like the Sylvanas cutscene, they have to hard stick every character, even if they're not interested in it, while they play their cutscene. By having these self-contained little scenarios, and they're very tiny, so they last about 5 minutes or something, they're able to then progress the story of the overall arc of the story in a great way. That is something I really wish more MMOs would implement, because I've seen it in a couple, but usually done in a half-assed way, and I think Final Fantasy XIV definitely does that in a superior way. We are going to start with the positives here. I definitely have some criticisms, but again, take this from the first 8 hours of playing, right? So this might change later on. This is the older expansion. It's not the newer one, etc., etc., etc. Things would definitely improve. So I really enjoyed doing the main story quests. I knew who the characters were. I knew when they were revealed to be more important characters later. I might meet somebody who is kind of a bit of a loser or somebody you wouldn't really care about, but later on turns out to be somebody important. And because you do this scenario with them, and they have dialogue, and you get to know their names, even if they're ridiculous, like Foofaloopa and things like that, then you do get to know what's going on. And I very much enjoyed that so much. Side questing. So I didn't really touch the side questing. There's no need to. Very similar to most older MMOs now, this is a catch-up system. If you do the main story, you're going to get more than enough experience in order to progress and keep going. You don't need to be doing the side questing, which then brings us to the fates and things. So as you're walking around, you'll pick up these main story quests, which are relatively clearly marked. You'll do these stories, you'll move from area to area. The world is quite nice. For an older MMO, the world is pretty decent. I was surprised, actually. I was expecting it to be a little bit shitter than it actually was. It's not. The cities feel lively. There's lots of players. Obviously, huge amounts of players, which was a little bit of a step back from going to Orgrimmar or something like that, where the world can feel relatively dead. They were bustling. The cities were bustling with life. The NPCs were interesting. It was nice to see all the players. And I quite enjoyed, as much as I feel like the community hates them, the bards who are able to play music in various areas. It felt like a contribution to it, even though a lot of them are apparently bots, which are just positioned to play music around there. It was a nice extra thing of liveliness brought by players to the world. So I was relatively surprised by not only the graphical quality for an older game, but in fact the immersion factor. And I don't say that lightly. The immersion factor was actually really good to go around the city. I was in Ul'dah, the Lalafell city, which is unfortunately where I started, the Lalafell city, going around and just being quite happy with the city, if a little awkward to navigate, but we'll come back to that later on. Out in the open world then, so they've made some nice twists. Some really nice twists. Let's talk about the fate system. Not new. Guild Wars 2 uses it. A number of other MMOs use it. New World uses it as well. And these are random events that are happening in the world. Yeah, I do think Final Fantasy XIV has a really good implementation of this system. They appear on the map, so you can see this little area saying there is a random event going on here that you can take part in. It might be people trying to break into a bar. It might be some wild, some fish are getting eaten. And you need to stop the monsters that are killing the fish because they need to feed the village, so go and do that. All basic stuff so far. But there was two things I really liked about this. One, the level sync system. So if you approach that area and you've over-leveled it and you're like, oh, I kind of wanted to take part in this, they will sync your level, which literally drops you down to that level. So any spells you've learned after that level, so let's say you're level 16 and you go to do a fate that's actually for level 10s, it will sync you down to level 10. It will stop you being able to use your spells that you learned after level 10, which is fine for a little fate event. It's nothing that's inconvenient at all. They have a timer on them as well, but it's based on your contribution. So you might turn up and the time's like 15 minutes, and my brain instantly was like, oh, I'm going to be here for 15 minutes. No, it works out how much you've done. It's like, oh, okay, you might only be there for 1 or 2 minutes. You've done your part. You've taken part in the event. And if there's lots of people doing it, the last boss, or whatever the main objective is, will spawn much sooner, meaning you can complete the mission just as you generally arrive. You still have that thing where you can arrive at the very last second and not get any benefit from it, but that's par for the course for random events that spot up. It doesn't bother me that much. But it's nice that you can turn up to these events, join in with a number of other players, and also it allows players to congregate together, and it creates a world. And that's the important thing. That's the good thing about these kind of events in any MMO, is it's a place where players could congregate. They're not just going around the standard questing route, right? A lot of you are playing the Burning Crusade, so you know Hellfire Peninsula has a route. You go around there, and if you're like 2 steps ahead, you're never going to see the people who are 2 steps behind or 2 steps in front of you. You're just going to go round the conveyor belt. And this actually draws you away from doing whatever your main quest is to a different part of the map in order to take part in a fate. And it's something I would really like to see implemented across many MMOs. Certainly better, as Blizzard has already worked with this, which is the bonus mission thing that we generally got in Walls of Draenor and have seen a little bit since. Unfortunately, they were always just fill the bar. For the most part, there wasn't some extra objective. There wasn't some nice big boss we could fight at the end. It was turn up, grind the mobs. That's what most of the bonus objectives were. Rather than trying to just interject something a little bit different, a little bit more fun. Which is moving on to the next thing, which I really liked as well, which is the menagerie system. So one of the biggest burdens, and Final Fantasy XIV still suffers from this, I'm going to talk about this a little later, is that they are still woefully, and all MMOs have this problem, and it really is a problem in my eyes. They are woefully desperate for a new style of quest that isn't collect 5 things. And I think they're so aware that this system is so antiquated, and every RPG under the sun that comes out in the last 5 years has moved well past this system of collect 5 bear asses. Final Fantasy XIV, certainly in A Realm Reborn, still has that problem. But they've put a little twist on it, which is the menagerie system, which is that you can get the kill 3 things quest without having to go to an NPC and pick up that quest, and there'll be an icon above the mobs to say, these are a new type of enemy, they're part of the menagerie, kill 3 of them, and we'll progress you up to higher tier monsters, and we'll also auto-complete that quest for you. So as you're wandering around the world, you might spot a new type of enemy, which is not uncommon in any MMO, but then you see it has this little icon above your head. So you stop what you're doing, right? It takes you again off the beaten track for a little moment, and it's only like 3 to 5 enemies. It's not 15 raptor eyes or 20 raptor eyes, at least not so far, and that might be part of the side questing, which I'm ignoring, but for now, this is a good system. This is something that says, oh, cool, I can stop here, and I already have the quest because it's part of my menagerie. That means that I kill 3 things, I get the quest complete, and I get the experience, and I carry on. What I'm not having to do is go backwards and forwards to an NPC, pick up this quest, get told to go there, go and do that thing, and then come back. That has been cool, because it's something that distracts you from just plodding along with the routine. And MMOs need that so desperately, is to have something that's not just sit on the conveyor belt and go along like a fucking moron, going from quest to quest to quest to quest to quest. This is stuff that's just saying, why don't you go over here a little bit? Fates are doing that, the Menagerie's doing that, you're already there, and now you can not think like I would do in World of Warcraft, which is, I'm not going to kill these now because I probably get a quest from Billy, and Billy's going to tell me to come back here and kill those things. And if he doesn't give me them, I'm never going to touch them in my life. Right? That's definitely the routine I would get into in a World of Warcraft style MMO. Having the Menagerie there to say, hey, stop here, kill these things, and maybe a fate will pop up. And those kind of things that distract you and give you a more immersive world, and that brings more players together. 2 thumbs up from that. Let's talk about the negatives then. Overall positives, main story so far is fantastic. Really enjoying that, really enjoying the immersion factor of it. Wasn't even that put down when the voice acting did kick in. Let's talk about the voice acting then. We'll move on to negatives. Those are my positives so far for the first 8 hours. Let's talk about the negatives. First of all, the voice acting in English especially. Apparently it's very much better in Japanese, but this is the older expansion. The voice acting is atrociously bad. Like, painfully, woefully bad. Almost to the point of being funny. Oh,
Sultan Tree, hallowed spirit of my line.
There it is.
Forgive my weakness. My failings have cost us dear.
It gives me that King's Bounty 2 vibe where it's like, oh, this feels like old voice acting when it was early days. And it is that old voice acting. So it kind of gets a pass, although it definitely is a bit yikers. It's also very in the teenage anime style, which some people love, some people hate. That's the way it's going to go. One of the biggest negatives of the game so far has actually been the map. The map system is so bad in Final Fantasy XIV. It really, it's one of those things that you can get used to. Very similar to the Atlas in Path of Exile. You can get used to it, but it doesn't change the fact that it is awful. It's absolutely terrible. For a new player especially, and I know that older players look at it and go, it all makes perfect sense to me, like you're reading The Matrix. For a new player, And you guys know, I've had like 30 years experience with in-game maps. This thing is really bad. Getting used to that was awkward, especially when it's dealing with verticality. It's very obnoxious in order to get to places. I'm getting used to it now, and it's fine. You can work with it. But goddamn, does that thing need an update. That thing's atrociously bad. A very weird thing they have with Final Fantasy XIV is that tutorials on how to do things only pop up after you've figured out how to do them. I'll give you an example. So there might be a quest where we can all be familiar with this, where you go and you're going to put something on the ground which is going to lure a beast, and you kind of have to wait for it. And the way they do it in Final Fantasy XIV is there'll be a circle on the floor, very similar to World of Warcraft, where you have to go and you have to place something on the floor. So you'll approach it, you'll see the circle. Okay, I need to do something to the circle. You'll try left click, right click. Okay, right click, I could do something. Then it will open an inventory where you can see an item, and then it has a little box saying drop an item on the floor. Right click it, okay, then I drop it on the floor. You do the task. Then a tutorial will pop up to say, in order to do this, you need to right-click it, and then you need to drag things, and you're like, what? Similar with opening various inventory items, opening certain inventories, such as your armory box, where your gear is stored, which is a great system, because it sorts your items automatically that you've picked up. It only tells you how to use that after you've opened it. It's one of those weird quirks they could definitely do with changing the trigger time, so that it happens when you approach the area, the tutorial pops up, instead of you figuring it out first, then a tutorial popping up and telling you how to do it. It's very awkward and very strange, but it is the way it goes. How's the gameplay so far? Well, I was warned very specifically that the early game of Final Fantasy XIV is slow. You've probably all heard about this 2.5-second global cooldown, and it's really slow until you get to the later expansions where things get much faster and gets much more interesting. I decided to play a caster because we've been covering Path of Exile for the last week or so, where I was full melee, two-hander smashing things. So I fancied a caster. I've been smashing things in the skull for the last 170 hours of gameplay. So it was time to play a little bit of a caster. This was actually a really good idea. I'm currently playing a black mage. This was a great idea because the cast time of the spells, such as my fire and my blizzards, alleviate that global cooldown problem. I don't notice it because I'm casting a spell. So if you think about a mage in World of Warcraft, and obviously I'm comparing to World of Warcraft here because most of you guys know that, you don't think about the global cooldown a lot if you're casting a fireball, if you're casting a frostbolt, because your global cooldown is more than run out by the time your spell's cast, which means the 2.5-second GCD hasn't really affected me at all, and I think that was super helpful. Remember, you don't pick a class really in this game. You can swap your character to any class it wants to be, because they call it the job system. So if I started as a black mage and I really wasn't enjoying it, which I am right now, the black mage is fine for now, I could swap over to melee. Very simply, you just change job. You go to a different place and you start learning how to be melee. So I'm going with the black mage, which has its own questline, which is cool, very similar to classic World of Warcraft stuff. You can see where their inspiration came from, and the Final Fantasy XIV guys are very open about being inspired by World of Warcraft. You can see that they took that vanilla experience of quests, class-specific quests, every few levels, really to heart, and gave a really good immersion factor to that, and that's what I'm doing right now, and they're really fun. This doesn't change one overwhelming factor, though. The gameplay is fucking awful right now, like, absolutely fucking awful. I'm so happy I'm Black Mage because the global cooldown is not much of a problem. I did get excited when I got a spell called Scathe, which is an instant cast spell. So I was like, oh, I actually have something I can do when I'm moving out of the way of a frontal cone or a charge or something like that, which are very clearly depicted in the game. But that initiates this 2.5-second GCD. That's when I felt it. That's when I felt it. So I was like, oh, I move, so I use my instant cast, and then I can't cast anything else when I stand still because I'm on this enormous global cooldown. So it's noticeable from that perspective, to the point where it made no sense to use instant cast spells because they do little damage, because I can move quicker than I can recast the spell, which is just madness. And I'm sure that's going to change somewhat later on, or maybe it won't. I don't know. But in terms of the gameplay being awful, the story that's going on is great. The actual gameplay involved in it is really awful, and I cannot wait for that to change at some point. I really cannot wait. I haven't done a dungeon yet, so I haven't had that full-on factor of going with a group, but they're still trapped in this antiquated world of it be like a grandiose story, kill 4 things, deliver a message. Okay, so it's like, this is really important. This sneaky thing's going on in the underground, and we need to deal with this. And of course, by the 12, something horrible is going to happen. You're like, oh yeah, this is going to be really cool. Deliver this note to Billy and tell him we need a pumpkin for the feast. Okay. So he runs to Billy and you're like, have you got the pumpkin? He's like, yeah, here's the pumpkin. Like, okay, take the pumpkin back. All right. What about if we go over here? Kill 3 enemies. Okay. Well, at least they're quick, right? That's at least the alleviating part of that, is at least they're fast. But the gameplay is really at odds with the story in an MMO genre, is you want something good. I think this is where Star Wars got better, because the gameplay was much better. Alongside a fantastic story, the gameplay was much better. But again, it comes with the caveat that this gets much, much better, and if this is something that's going to put you off, you can boost past it. I'm going to experience the whole thing, because I really want to experience it. But the gameplay has definitely been the negative so far. I really hope that picks up. I can't wait to see what dungeon... like, aspirations going forward then. I cannot wait to do dungeons and start seeing some boss mechanics. Those are the things that really get me going. I want to see what those are like. I want to see the rest of the story. Like, right now, I absolutely want to see what the rest of the story and how it plays out. I've moved on to my second zone now, which is going to be a main city called Lima. I'm going to go and see that place now and figure what that's going to happen. And the gameplay, I'm going to not poke the bear, right? I've been told it's going to be bad. It is bad. That's unquestionable. It is bad right now, but it will get better. So I'm going to see how long that takes to play out, and then I can probably come to some conclusion of like whether or not it's worth doing the story, which right now it is, while putting up with terrible gameplay. And also, if you're playing melee, it's probably considerably worse than the experience I'm having, because my mage is kind of covering this slow global cooldown aspect, and we'll see how that goes with it. So those are my initial thoughts so far. I'm really excited to see how the world branches out and does different things. It's nice that I've just been introduced to another story with a character called Nero, who was very edgy and very, very sort of over-the-top speeches and things like that. Very Final Fantasy. I have played the other Final Fantasies, several of them, so we'll see how this plays out and dealing with the world. I would say that one thing that is noticeable is, probably because a stream of privilege has been evoked here a little bit, is a lot of people came to greet me, and I got to see a lot of the mounts and transmogs and things like that, and the whole variety of things. I think it's interesting that they're very immersion breaking, but in a fun way that's fine. I know that in many games, and this will be something that divides a lot of players, items like mounts and armors that don't really seemingly fit into the environment that you're playing in could be a problem. For me, I think it's okay right now. This game is utterly ridiculous. Utterly ridiculous. You're either driving big fat mice that are pooping everywhere, or you're riding around on inflatable cactuses, or a giant space whale, or you're driving a car, a motorbike, or a spaceship. You're doing all those kinds of things. And it does look wrong. It does. Although Final Fantasy, with its Magitech and everything else, encompasses all these things. So there's always going to be somebody who goes, well, it makes sense. Yes, I know, in the story of Final Fantasy, it does make sense. Doesn't change the fact that it completely breaks the immersion to see that. But I think it works. I think it kind of works. In a fun, ridiculous way. You just want your characters to be fun and enjoyable. And that's where they've gone. It's like, yeah, but it's fun. And it's kind of the argument I always had. And I know this is an unrelated thing, but you'll see where I'm going with it. With 10-man raiding in World of Warcraft. As somebody who's very mechanically minded and balance-minded, I know why 10-man raiding doesn't exist. The same way Blizzard doesn't. Because they can never make it work with the amount of classes and variety in the game. It just doesn't work. It just falls apart very, very quickly. But in a deep conversation with somebody who's also similar-minded to me, but just said, but it's more fun. And I couldn't argue with that in any way, and I didn't want to, because he's right. It is more fun. I raided 10-man a lot, and that factor has to be taken into account when you're dealing with things. Is it perfectly balanced? No. Does it make sense? No, not really. Like, it falls apart very easily. It's very flimsy, but it's a lot of fun. And I kind of see so many elements of that in Final Fantasy XIV right now, is where they're like, yeah, this is kind of stupid, but it's really fun. And I think the players, from what I can see, are totally okay with that. Which doesn't surprise me at all. Is like, you just give me a playground to play in and let me play with my toys. As long as it's not utterly ridiculous, although this does tether the line of utterly ridiculous, it's more fun that way. So those are my thoughts right now. Those are what things I'm excited for the next couple of days. And I'll probably come back to you after like 2 more days of playing, to give you an update on how that's going. All right. So thank you very much. There you go, folks. That is day 1 complete. I hope that was intriguing to you. I imagine I've said some things that you're like, ha ha ha, that's going to change. Or maybe that's not going to change, and we'll see how it goes. So far, it's been really fun. I'm excited to play more. I'm more than ready to jump in. So keep tracking with us. I'll be back with you in a couple of days to let you know how it's gone since then, and whether my recommendations or thoughts have changed at all, all right? Thank you so much for watching. Remember to check out our website for any updates or pick up some awesome shirts like this one. Entirely up to you, my friends. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.